of the Old Testament scriptures. Today we're going to talk about two subjects. Number one, Old Testament canon and the Apocrypha. First of all, we'll talk about the Old Testament canon. Canon is described as a rule or a measuring stock in reference to a set of books regarding authoritative scriptures inspired by God. This was accomplished about the 5th century, somewhere around 450 or 460 AD. And when we talk about inspired scriptures of God, you need to look at that first video that I made. Where did we get the Bible from? Inspired scriptures are what God spoke, Hebrews 1:1, to the prophets, all the Old Testament prophets, all the way from Genesis to Malachi, and those prophets wrote down exactly what God said. Those are inspired scriptures, and they don't change. And so when we talk about canonization of the Old Testament, that's what we're talking about. A couple of things. Number one, Christ established the canon, the extent of the canon of the Old Testament. In Matthew 23:35, he says, "From the blood of righteous Abel to the blood of Zechariah." It's also found in Luke chapter number 11. He's talking about from righteous Abel, Genesis, to righteous Zechariah, which would be the book of 2 Chronicles. Historically, a Hebrew Bible, the last book in the Hebrew Bible is 2 Chronicles. In our English Bible, it's Malachi. But our English Bible, our King James Bible, was divided up into the Pentateuch, the history, the Psalms, and poetry books, then major prophets, there's 6, I believe, 5 or 6, and 12 minor prophets. That's in our Bible, in our English Bible, but in the Hebrew Bible, the history of Israel, the major and minor prophets existed during that history time. You can intertwine Isaiah and Jeremiah before exile and during exile and after exile. These prophets all fit into the history of Chronicles, Kings, and Samuel, those books. And so Christ said, establish the canon from Genesis to 2 Chronicles. 2 Chronicles ended about 450, 457 BC. And then if you remember in your history, there's 400 years of silence when there's no Bible written from 2 Chronicles all the way to the beginning of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, the apostles. There's 400 years where God does not speak to anyone. These books, these collection of Old Testament books were established during the Council of Jamnia, 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 around 90 AD. A group of Jewish leaders, rabbis, what we would call them priests or pastors in our churches today. They were church leaders. They started with 24 books. 24 books. And then we end up with 39 books in the Old Testament. And how does that happen? Well, the book of Samuel, 1st and 2nd Samuel, was one book. So they divided it into two books, 1st and 2nd Samuel. Chronicles was the same way. It was one big, long book. And they divided that into 2 books. And Kings was one long book, and they divided that to 2 books. So there's 3 added to 24. 3 books added to 24 makes 27. And then you have 5 major prophets and the minor prophets, 12. So you have 27 and 12 makes 39. So we have the minor prophets was all one book. And if you have read through the minor prophets, they're very short, Zechariah being one of the longest ones. And I think Amos has 8 or 12 chapters. Don't quote me on that. But some of them are small. Obadiah, 1 chapter. Joel has 3 chapters. Jonah, 4 chapters. That was all one big book. They changed that to 12 smaller books. And that was started with 24 and they end up with 39. That was in the first century, about 90 AD. The Masoretes, the Masoretic text, which we call the Masoretic text, these folks were doing their work between 500 AD and 1000 AD. They were collecting these inspired scriptures, and they were going to decide which books stayed in and which books were out. And they accomplished that, like I said, in the middle of about the 5th century. Now, there's 2 groups of Masoretic texts. Just like in the New Testament, there's several manuscripts. There was 2 for the Old Testament. One was called the Ben Chaim. Ben, B-E-N, and then the last name is Chaim, C-H-A-Y-Y-I-M. That's the text that the King James used to translate the Old Testament. In 1516, Daniel Bomberg compiled the first rabbinical Bible, in which the King James translators used as the Old Testament text. And later, that Bible was looked at by Ben Chaim, and we have the second rabbinical Bible, and that was also used by the King James translators. And so that's our traditional Hebrew text, the Ben Chaim. Now there was also another fellow that came along called the Ben Asher text, also a Masorite, but he included many other manuscripts, some Egyptian, some Greek, just like they did for the New Testament. They incorporated a lot of other manuscripts. He used those and used the traditional text, the Masoretes did, but then he added in and made some changes. And if you go back and look at that Old Testament doctrinal errors, I taught there from the Bible, the errors that are in this Ben Asher text, and I'll give you just a few here in case you don't go back and look at that video. Isaiah 14:12. Isaiah 14:12. Lucifer is changed from the Masoretic text, the Ben Chaim text, to morning star or day star. That was one of the big doctrinal errors, because Lucifer is the devil. He's fallen from heaven. When you look at Isaiah 14:12, how out there, O Lucifer, fallen from heaven. And they call him the morning star, and some texts call him the day star. The morning star is in reference to Christ, Revelation 22:16. The day star is also attributed to Christ in 2 Peter 1:19, not Lucifer. And so there's a great doctrinal error there, and you can see that between the 2 texts. Also, Psalm 109, verse 6. Psalm 109, verse 6, Satan in that verse is translated under the Ben Asher text as an accuser or a resistor. It's not translated Satan. And it's funny because in the other places of the same Ben Asher text, 2 Chronicles 21, it's Satan. Job 1, 6, 7, 8, 9, 12, it's translated Satan, same word. Job chapter number 1, verses 1 and 2, it's translated Satan. And in Zechariah 3, 1 and 2, the same word is translated Satan. But at Psalm 109, verse 6, it's translated resistor or accuser. So you can see they made a change there in the Ben Asher text. The Masoretic text has it Satan in all those places that I just read in our Bible. And so we find these Masoretes were using the traditional text of the Hebrew text. They made up a set of rules, not only the rules that were there for copying, and if you want to see that video, I also made rules for copying the Old Testament. You can look that video up, but they set up their own strict rules for their translation of the text. They began to number the verses. Words and letters of each book were given vowels put in between them. In the Hebrew language, there are no vowels like A, E, I, O, U. So they began to number the verses, and the words they put in vowels. Number 2, they counted the number of times each letter of the alphabet occurred in each verse for a checkpoint. Number 3, they determined the middle letter of each book as the checkpoint, again, to make sure they did not translate any verse of Scripture. And if you look at that video I did on Old Testament, preservation of the Old Testament, the rules that were set for copying, you'll see that these were set, again, some more rules they set down so that they could check themselves. And so that's the text that the King James used, the Ben Chaim, and not the Ben Asher. All of this you can find if you're going to study. It's on the internet, but be sure when you look these up, keep this in mind. The Ben Chaim is the traditional Hebrew text. The Ben Asher uses the traditional text, but also adds in a few other manuscripts. And one of those other types of manuscripts we're going to talk about is the Apocrypha, or the hidden books. The Apocrypha were hidden books of the Bible that were not considered inspired scripture for 2 reasons. The first reason, these books were written in the Greek language. They were not in the Hebrew language. So when the Masoretes looked at it, and also when this Council of Gemna looked at it in 90 AD, they saw these books. They did not consider them to be inspired scriptures. So because there was some doubt, because they were written in the Old Testament, but the first book was written about 150 BC. That would have been in the time of those 400 years of silence. 150 BC, and the last book was written about 30 BC. And so these were written during that time of silence, of which Christ did not determine the canon for the Old Scripture from the time of righteous Abel's blood to the time of the blood of Zechariah. They knew that. But here were these scriptures, and they said, well, we're not sure. So they put them between the Old Testament are at the end of the Old Testament, these Apocrypha books. They never were worked in to the Old Testament. When we get to our English Bible, our King James Bible, and I'm not getting ahead of myself because I'm trying to keep this all together, the Old Testament ended, and then the King James Bible came across these Apocrypha books, these hidden or concealed books is what they are, written in the Greek between the years of 150 BC to 30 BC, a time in between the 400 years of silence. And they put those books between the Old Testament and the New Testament. Never considered them as part of the Old Testament. Our English Bibles never did. But they were in the King James Bible. When Tyndale translated his work, the Apocrypha was included there. So Tyndale, in 1525, he set aside these uninspired scriptures between the Old and New Testament, as did the Coverdale Bible in 1525. In 1537, the Matthew's Bible placed them between, again, the Old and the New Testament. In 1611, the King James, the Great Bible, the Geneva Bible, and the Bishop's Bible placed them in the appendix, which would have been after the New Testament. So they were moved from between the Testaments to the appendix after that. So here you have the Old Testament. We go into the New Testament at the end of Revelation 22. Then you have the Apocrypha. That's beginning with the Great Bible, 1539, the Geneva Bible, 1560, the Bishop's Bible, 1568, and then our King James Bible, 1611. Now, the King James Bible has several editions. Spelling, like Noah, it was, and if you find an old 1611, it's N-O-E, with an accent over the E, Noah. Traffic, T-R-A-F-F-I-C-K. And so in these editions, which means an edition is only making ready for publication, you edit something, they change the spelling of the words, probably about 450 words that were changed in their spelling. In the 1629 edition, which would have been about the third edition to the 1611, the Apocrypha was completely taken out of the appendix even. So the only thing that was in the 1629 to the 1769, which is a King James Bible today edition of 1769, which is a 1611. It's just been edited, the spellings, some grammar, commas, semicolons. That's all they did. They never changed the text at all. They changed some of the spellings and some of the grammar and some of the punctuations. So in 1629, the Apocrypha was taken completely out of our King James Bible, which we have today. Now, your modern versions of the Bible, and if you watch my other videos, there's only two Bibles. The King James Bible is one, and everything else is number two. I don't care what Bible you're reading, ESV, ASV, RSV, the New King James, they're all a retranslation of the King James Bible with additions. Not editing, additions. Different manuscripts, especially in the New Testament and also in the Old Testament. The Apocrypha in the modern versions, the Apocrypha was included in the text. It was weaved into the Old Testament. Our English Bibles never did that. They either were placed between the Testaments or at the end of the Testaments are completely done away with. So in some of the modern translations of the Bible, the apocryphal books, that's a tongue twister, were placed in between the text as part of the text. It never was. They were never canonized, canonical books by the Hebrew scholars. They never considered them. They did consider them something, but they didn't know what they were until about the 5th century. They said, okay, these books really aren't inspired scripture. The reason why they say that is there's never a reference from Christ to these books or any of the apostles. Peter never went back and quoted any scripture from these apocryphal books. And so they say, probably not scripture. So if you're reading now in some of your Catholic Bibles, up until maybe about, I'm going to say 100 years ago, you could still find the Apocrypha in your Douay Rheims Bible. The New Jerusalem Bible, which is a Catholic Bible, I believe they've taken the Apocrypha out, but it's still a Catholic Bible. So basically, if you're reading a retranslation of the King James, you're reading a Catholic Bible. That's basically what it is. It's Jerome's Bible. And we'll get into that. We'll get into Jerome. We'll get into Westcott Hort. We'll get into some of the other manuscripts. I believe the next video that I'm going to do is the Old Testament autographs and accurate copies from about 1600 BC to the New Testament time. That'll be the next video. But today we looked at the canonization of Scripture, what Scriptures belong and what Scriptures don't. We found out that the 39 books of the Old Testament are the ones we're supposed to have. The Apocrypha books, the ones we're not supposed to have. And that was determined by a group of Hebrew rabbis and scholars around 450, 457, the 5th century AD. And so there you have it. Now, most of my videos prior to this, we dealt entirely with internal evidence. This is the first video that I've gone outside of the Bible, so to speak. Really not, because Christ determined what the books were to be canonized. But we've gone out and looked at history, some history books, to determine books of the Bible and not books of the Bible. And that may be disputed by some, but by faith we accept what the Hebrews did, what the Masoretes did when they translated their scripture. By the way, if there is a doubt about the text, you can look at Isaiah 14:12. I read the NIV, and they think it's the king of Babylon. He never fell from heaven. Lucifer did. And Genesis 49:10, where they leave out Shiloh, which is Christ. And 49:11 talks about his first coming and his second coming. And by leaving out that word, they miss some prophecy of the coming of Christ and the second coming of Christ in the scripture. So I didn't vary too far from the Bible, but we did look at a little bit of history. Next time I come on, we're going to look at probably more history on the copies, the autographs, which were the originals, and the manuscripts which were copies of the originals. There are no autographs today, but there are accurate copies. And when we get into talking about the New Testament, it gets very technical, but I'm going to try to keep it as simple as I can, hopefully, so that I can understand it, and that you can understand it, and that you can follow it. Well, thanks for watching today. And I hope you enjoyed the study. I hope you'll get your mind in gear, put your thinking cap on. If you need to go look at some history books about the Old Testament, you're free to do so. There's much information on the internet. Just be sure when you look at it, when you look at the internet, you're only going to find the Ben Chaim text and the Ben Asher. That's it. When we get to the New Testament, a lot of stuff you'll have to fish through, but we'll make it. I'll make the complex simple, as my friend Rush Limbaugh says, taking the complex and making it simple. Well, have a good day, and remember, let God be true, but every man a liar. Thanks, and come back next time and watch the next video. Glad you were with me today. Have a good